Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode is brought to you by TopTal, freelance development jobs for world-class engineers. This message is specifically for our listeners who prefer the freelance lifestyle. TopTal gives you the ability to work on freelance development jobs and projects with top clients who understand the value of elite engineering talent. Work with leading organizations at the rate you decide, be in control of your own schedule, and get plugged into support from a community of experts in the TopTal Global Network. TopTal handles all billing and invoicing, letting you fully focus on your engagements without negotiating terms with clients or bidding against other developers. TopTal is also 100% remote, which means you get to design your own lifestyle and choose projects that fit your career ambitions. If you're ready for an exciting remote work lifestyle, take the next step by joining TopTal at toptaljobs.com. Again, toptaljobs.com. Welcome to JS Party, a weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. Tune in live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific at changelog.com/live. Join the community and Slack with us in real time during the show at changelog.com/community. Follow us on Twitter. We're at JSPartyFM. And now on to the show.
Hey, it's your JS Party friends. We are here to hang out and talk about JavaScript and the web.
Shaboy!
Jared and I am joined by Suze, who's laughing at me. Say what's up.
It's great to be back. Thank you so much for having me.
If I can start off the show with Suze laughing, it's going to be a good show. Let's see if we can get Divya going. And Divya is also here. Hi, Divya. Say hello to the crowd.
Hello. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going very well. And we are here to talk about JavaScript and the web, celebrate such things. And we wanted to start off the party with a little bit of catch up, the new and noteworthy things in and around the JavaScript and web ecosystem. We have a lot to talk about here. I'm going to flip the script and actually start with the fun one. I started at first with the most interesting, but now I want to start with the fun one. Let's go to the JS 13K Games winners have been announced. If you're unfamiliar with this game, it's an awesome competition where you're supposed to make a game in JavaScript and the website is down. Are you serious?
I have it up.
Whoops, looks like something went wrong. It's a game in JavaScript in less than, was it 13 kilobytes of code, correct, Suze?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have it up. I was playing it earlier this morning.
Well, you crashed them because their website is down. Sorry. 13kgames.com. I think, is the winner still live? Because we want to talk about the winner who has an awesome game, which I can no longer load, I don't believe.
I'm going to have to cache this tab for life now.
Suze, why don't you take over? Tell us about the winner. It's a super cool game. I can't load it, so please do.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I actually forget what it's called just because I'm actually on the game. It looks like it's XX142-B2.exe.
There you go.
That is what I'm reading from the title. I was really impressed with this immediately because the first thing that happens is with this game is you get thrown into what looks like a text-based narrative kind of description, like opening scene, of a text-based narrative. And I remember thinking, this has so much text. This has to already eat into the budget of the 13 kilobytes that you have. I'm looking and I'm like, this is hundreds of bytes already. And I'm thinking maybe they do something tricky, are they allowed to fetch swaths of text and then, via Ajax and things like that. So I was looking into it. And so I thought, whatever, I bet you the rest of the game is really small. I'll look into this later. And then, you click continue and you just end up in this 3D game. And I'm like, are you serious right now? How are they doing this? And so it's actually really cool. The idea is that you are this little sort of pointy avatar, and there's this concept of files. And I think you understand this a little better, Jared, but you're basically navigating through this 3D sort of path, and you have to use your previous ghosts of yourself, expiring in order to sort of unlock gates and get through.
Yes, exactly. So thanks to Pina Veris in the chat who got us the direct link to the winning game, which is still loading. And the entry text that you're talking about, I'll just read it because it's such a cool setup. The year is 2413. Humanity is enslaved by an alien race for more than 2 centuries already. You are an AI weaponized virus built to infiltrate the alien network and deactivate all power generators and weapon systems. The alien antivirus will detect and delete you after 13 seconds. But remember, a file is never really deleted. Use the execution backtrace from your previous attempts to break in and destroy the main memory core. So yeah, like you said, you basically move around and try to make it through certain gates, and the real gaming mechanism is the backspace button, where you can start the level over and leave your previous trace there and use it to advance. They say backspace is kill-9, the executable. So super nerdy, super cool. Built by Ben Clark and Salvatore Previti. So congrats to them on an awesome game. I'm amazed by how you can fit so much into 13K.
Yeah, I'm looking through the source code, and it's actually really nice to read, even though it's minified. Like, it's still incredibly readable. Like, I've looked at the source code for these kinds of things before, like even JS1K and things like that. And it's always just been completely illegible. But this one's really cool. So you can kind of see that in order to produce those large swaths of text at the beginning, they just created a string that had all the letters of the alphabet and like the first, numerical numbers from 0 to 9, like all next to each other as one string. And then they're just using character code @ with the correct offset in the ASCII table in order to pull out the index of which one they need to express, as the next text, which I thought was really awesome. And then you can actually see how they've set up a lot of the levels too. They have a bunch of mappings with like X's and Y's and things like that. So most of the actual source code is setting up all, I guess, like the rooms or the levels and just plotting them out. And I think that's really very cool, given that it feels like a very complex game.
It does. It's clever in so many facets. Just the idea itself is clever, and then the execution. The interesting thing about the way that I believe it would work is because the idea in the game is that you're replaying the previous run through, there's so much recursive code or just executing back the previous functions that were called that you can squeeze a lot out of very little code and make it feel complex, but really it's just rerunning something that's already run.
Yeah, it's super cool. And yeah, I'm just like kind of surprised at how readable it is. They wrote some really beautiful code. Like a lot of the verbs and the variable namings really help you understand how it works. So like they didn't even have to do that. And I admire the fact that they were very thoughtful about how the code was presented as well. So that was an absolute joy this morning to take a tour of.
So I've done one game jam in JavaScript and had a lot of fun doing it, but I've never done any code golf kind of competitions or even really tried coding golf. I know those kind of things began in the Perl world. That's a tongue twister, Perl world. Have either of you done code golfs or trying to squeeze, every single character down to as small as you could possibly do?
I think I've seen the like someone has done challenges within like 140 characters when Twitter used to be 140 characters. Mm-hmm. So you'd write a problem like FizzBuzz or something within that character limit as much as possible, which was really fun to see. It's so unreadable, but it works.
I think that the only stuff that I've really run into is just regular, like trying to write code for embedded devices. You were always resource constrained. And so I think the biggest golfing expedition I went on recently was how many frames of a GIF can I fit in memory for this device to receive over the internet? And then what is the best data structure to try and make the most of memory in? And so I was like, do I just use like a continuous, stream of memory on the device, like contiguous, or do I use like linked lists in order to kind of use that fragmentation better? And so for me, it's always like, I need to fit more than 6 frames of this GIF on this device. How do I do that? So my stuff's more like memory golfing more than actual like file size golfing, I think.
Yeah, the only bit that I've done, I've read the code golfs, and I think there's like a Vim golf, which maybe I tried that, which was fun back in the day. Like what are the fewest number of Vim commands that you can do to accomplish whatever task is out there, which is a great way to learn Vim if you're into that kind of a thing. Is I used to do these code games where I would create code, usually in Ruby or JavaScript, that represented a movie title. And so, the goal is the person has to guess then what movie it represents. And so that's the only time I've really written code, not for readability or just to get the stinking thing to work, but to write it in such a way that the form of the code is more important than what it actually executes. It's definitely mind expanding. Okay, let's move on to a little bit less fun, but probably more impactful for your general JavaScript audience, those who are not making super tiny code games or want to play them, is that top level await has landed in V8 and is in Babel and a bunch of other things. Miles Borens, friend of the show, I think he's been on 1 or 2 episodes of JS Party back in the day, writing about top-level await on the V8 website. This enables developers to use the await keyword outside of async functions. So we've had async await for a while now, but you've never previously been able to use it outside of a async function. Now you can use it right at the top level of a module, and all sorts of interesting use cases fly out of that. Is this something that passed your guys' radar? What do you think about async await, top level await?
You know that Miles, for the last few years, was actually trying to gather use cases for it, because I think he was one of the ones that initially suggested it, or people were pushing back on async await because of that. So he was trying to ask. And I remember he asked me about it, and I said, well, async await is really nice for, again, embedded. I'm like a broken record about this topic, but for hardware related things, it just makes the code so much more readable and maintainable, to a point. And so for me, having to wrap things constantly just kind of made some of my code a little bit more convoluted. And like, it was just wrapping things for the sake of wrapping things just to get it to work, which feels like a code smell. And so I like the idea of it. I'm actually kind of fascinated about how they would have implemented that in the engine more than anything, but I think that it's going to make my life easier. But other than that, like, I'm not sort of pumped and shouting out into the streets about it, but I know that this was a very long game to sort of float this by the implementers, of the spec.
Yeah, I find it really annoying to always have to remember to use async when I await stuff. So for instance, if you're calling an API, you're always awaiting it, but then in order for that await to work, you have to wrap the entire function in an async. So I always get that console error saying like, hey, you don't have async, you can't use await without async, which is like, half the time I'm like, the async, it feels very redundant. It's almost like doing a return promise and doing a resolve when you just want to do like promise.resolve instead. It's the same idea where I'm just wrapping and adding a lot of boilerplate to code that doesn't have to use that particularly. And like specifically, a lot of times I write Vue, and so I would have to create an entire function that's async, even though only one part of it uses await and the rest doesn't.
Yeah, totally.
So like in a method, it's like that method is async and it does like multiple things, but I need So it makes it much cleaner this way, because there are a lot of times where you're just using, like, the assumption is that there is a promise. If you're making an API call or whatever, that's a promise. And so you can just await it. You don't have to async.
Mm-hmm. I really like how you likened it to like some of the kind of boilerplate you have to do with promises where you just want to do the thing. I've definitely felt the same sort of cringy feeling as I'm trying to put things together, and it's just like causing bloat.
Well, yeah, especially because for a long time, whenever the async await was starting to come into the fore, people were talking about how async await is way better than promises. And I was like, sure, it's great. But then because a lot of the times the corollary was talking about promise hell and how frustrating that is. Because with await, you can just basically create a const and then you would await. And then whenever that is ready, then you can use it and so on. But the thing is, the argument around less boilerplate never made sense. Because I was like, okay, yeah, async await is cleaner to read because you actually get a return value versus promises. But at the same time, you still have that boilerplate because in order to use await, you need async. And so you need to wrap everything constantly. And I think that was the part that not a lot of people talked about. It's kind of like the hand wavy, like, oh, it's fine. It's like better than what we had before. But that was the one annoyance I always had, just this constant having to remember. It's almost similar to, I was talking to someone about this with whenever you create a button, you have to always create cursor pointer as a CSS.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
It's like everyone needs that, and you still have to write that boilerplate. Thank you, CSS working group. Like,
is that a fact? I guess I've never noticed that.
Yeah, I mean, every time you want a button, like you always want a pointer on it, always.
Sure. Yeah.
But it doesn't work by default, so you have to add cursor pointer. So the boilerplate is always button cursor pointer.
Like whenever you create pointer.
Yeah.
It's like one of the first lines you write because you just want a global for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, throw that in your normalize or whatever. So a couple of things you mentioned the pushback, Suze, and Miles does talk about some of the arguments about top level await being a foot gun, which I guess that's a term I hadn't really heard before, but something from which to shoot yourself in the foot with. A couple of things Rich Harris wrote about is that it could be a way to block execution. It could also block fetching resources. And the team has done, I think, a pretty good job of addressing these potential pitfalls and at least accounting for them. Now, I think you still probably can shoot yourself in the foot, but you can do that with most tools, especially sharp ones. So check out the blog post that Miles wrote for more information on that, and get out there and try top level await. Now, maybe you're thinking, I already have this. It's in my dev tools. Well, that was the only place it previously existed. It was in dev tools as, I guess, syntactic sugar, or a nice way of using it without that extra anonymous function. But now you'll find it in the browsers outside of the dev tools. So there you have it, top level await.
I think that foot gun actually does make sense. But the issue is that these days you can do a while loop that runs forever, and you can stuff it in an async function. And then that will actually stop it from blocking the whole execution main thread, which is really, really interesting. And so I'm just hoping that people will remember that they still need to put that in there.
This episode is brought to you by Linode, our cloud server of choice. It is so easy to get started with Linode. Servers start at just $5 a month. We host changelog on Linode cloud servers, and we love it. We get great 24/7 support, Zeus-like powers with native SSDs, a super fast 40 gigabit per second network, and incredibly fast CPUs for processing. And we trust Linode because they keep it fast, they keep it simple. Check them out at linode.com/changelog.
Let's talk about a different thing, which is security related, maybe not necessarily performance related, but it's a cool new tool by Liran Tall. Apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. But he works for Sneak, and he's a sneaky security guy. I think we're actually talking with him to bring him on JS Party in a future episode and talk about security in JS and all of the different things that you have to think about to write secure JavaScript code. He has a new tool called Is Website Vulnerable, which uses public zero-day, or the listings of the CVEs and known vulnerabilities in JavaScript libraries. It's a npm module that you can, or a command line tool that you can install, and then run npx is website vulnerable, pass it a domain, start with your own, and then you can move on to other people's. Use it in a white hat way, please. And you can find known vulnerabilities in the front-end JS libraries. So the example is run it against example.com, and it will spit out basically this is running jQuery 2.1.4, which has 2 known vulnerabilities. It will link you to more information about those, and you can run it against your websites and then fix all your known vulnerabilities. Now, what would be cool is if you could fix your unknown vulnerabilities, but that's a whole nother step.
The first thing I thought of when I read about this news was some people are going to feel kind of threatened just because not everyone sees public security conversations as a good thing. And so they're going to feel they're basically going to feel more vulnerable to attack from people and get afraid. But that's not the point of this. And then the second thing I thought of was to do with bug bounties. And I was like, oh, people have another tool for those who sort of try to participate in security, like bounty programs, to report vulnerabilities and things like that. It gives them another tool in their tool belt to try and find stuff when the source code is not, like, of the website itself is not necessarily open source. It's kind of interesting, actually. Sort of provides that weird middle ground.
Yeah, because it's publicly available information, but it's not easily surfaceable. So I think probably, script kiddies especially will have tools like these inside of tools like Metasploit, I believe. And so I think if you're already malicious and you're bent that way, you probably have some of this information, or at least ways of getting at this information. This, I believe, is its point is to, point it at things that you care about and then, fix them up. But yeah, any tool can be used both for good or evil. And so therein lies the rub.
How does this work with like the current NPM vulnerabilities thing? So like if you have if you have things on GitHub or if you use npm, you can do like npm audit, and it shows you all of the security vulnerabilities in that. Is it similar, or can't quite tell?
Yeah, that's a great question. And somebody actually asked him that. The thing that separates it from the npm audit is this is running on a remote website. So this is not things that you're using internally or in your dev dependencies or anything that you would have private on your backend, right? So like any node modules you're using with Express or server side, it doesn't do those. It's just whatever you're shipping to your clients. And so it's basically just downloading whatever JavaScript that your website sends on requests, and then unpacking those and detecting and running, fingerprinting tools to figure out what you're running against. And so it says, oh, you have jQuery 2.1.4. And then it basically takes that knowledge, runs it against the databases, probably does some sort of remote lookup and says, well, what's this? What are the known vulnerabilities here? And displays them to you.
I'm running it on my website right now.
Ooh, stay tuned. We're going to find out. Is SUSE vulnerable?
I have probably less than 2 kilobytes of JavaScript on it. I tried to keep my website very deliberately tiny. And so, yeah, I'm actually excited to see 0 total vulnerabilities.
Yes!
And that, folks, is how you fix up all your vulnerabilities. Just don't write JavaScript.
Just don't write any. That's right.
I have a tiny amount of JavaScript that sort of like, I think there might be a small resize listener. I'm sort of using CSS Grid in a weird way to create a sort of a Pinterest style tile layout, but it's not quite perfect. And so I have to run some JavaScript just to like adjust the heights and things. And that's pretty much the only JavaScript I think I have.
Okay, well, I'm npm installing as we speak, and we'll run it against changelog.com and see if we're quite as cool as SUSE. Spoiler alert, probably not.
I mean, I'm cheating. I don't think I'm using a single library. That's why, really. I mean, it's absolutely cheating.
Yes, that's totally cheating, because I think they're mostly checking known libraries, right? Not your own. Yeah. They're not going to be checking for malpractices in your own code, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that was the whole joke. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Good joke. It worked on me. Okay, next up, we have Vue 3. So Vue-Next is the up-and-coming and not released version of the beloved Vue.js. And the team has been working on this in private on a private repo, in the Vue-Next repo on GitHub, and they just recently open-sourced that repo. So it's not ready. I think it's pre-alpha, which alpha is pre-beta, so it's pretty pre at this point, pre-free. Don't use this. And it's not documented, and it's still very much in development, but it's out there, and you can read it, and you can check it out. And that's exciting, because I didn't even know there was a Vue 3 coming, and now I can look at the source code.
Yeah, it's been coming for a while. So it's interesting. So a lot of this, like with Vue 3, were all in RFCs. So they were talking about what was to come in order to get feedback from people who are using Vue and the community overall. So they had a lot of RFCs, like the composition function API one was the huge controversial one, because it introduced huge changes in the way you write current Vue syntax. And so that was a way for them to get like audience and like feedback, community feedback overall. And then when they released Vue-Next, actually, there was a lot of people who are very angry about that, just because when it was released, they were like, oh, it's all open source now. And then I think people were like, haha, TypeScript was open source from day one. So this is not really open source, because like you did things in private and then you showed it at the end, which like kind of begs the question of what counts as open source. I think it's really unfair, because there's a lot of flack for people who are just saying, like, basically like tearing the Vue team apart, saying that they should have done this from the beginning, and like, why did they make this private? And so on. Because I think the implementation, the RFCs were public, but how they were implementing things were still pretty private for a long time. So it seems from like looking at GitHub, they essentially have a checklist of all the things that they're working on, and so they check them as they finish them. So I think there's a couple more items on there, not that many. I think more than half is done. So, and they released it a week ago from the time of recording. So yeah, I think it's really great that they open sourced it, and like as they're working through it, I don't fault them for not open sourcing it from the start. In a way, like I think, yeah, as I said, it's really unfair to say that, to claim something is not open source when it wasn't open source in the beginning. there are lots of projects that weren't open source in the beginning, and then they just are like, oh, here you go. Here's the code that we worked on that we used to get money for. Yeah, the bizarre argument.
Yeah, I'm not a purist in any way. Like, if you want to work in private and then open source something, go for it. I think maybe from the inside of the community, if there's like an outer circle and an inner circle in a community, which I'm not claiming that's the case with Vue, but I could understand where if I was on that somewhat outer circle, like I'm a casual contributor and a user, and then there's like this inner core and they're working on something in private, maybe from that perspective, I might be a little bit offended. Like, why couldn't I participate until now? But I don't know that. I don't know if that's the case or believe that's the case necessarily with Vue.js. And I think from the outside perspective, I mean, the thing is pre-alpha. It's not like they just dropped version 3 on everybody and said, here, have fun. It's still very much community oriented.
Yeah. And even then, like, if you look at the trajectory of how things have been going, a lot of the Vue's development has been through RFCs. So like, granted, RFCs are pretty, they didn't do it in the beginning of Vue. So like Vue 1 and Vue 2 didn't do RFCs, but I think like they started doing RFCs very recently. And in a way, a lot of the process around like how exactly they came about with Vue 3 has been very public. So Evan has been talking about Vue 3 forever, like for a really long time, and just introducing the community to what is to come. So like TypeScript support, the function API, and all of that kind of stuff. And so in a way, I think that is like, they might not be showing the code that they've been working on, but talking about it means that they are pretty public with what exactly is happening and what the thought process is in terms of what's to come. In a way, it still counts because they were like pretty open. They weren't like fully open, sure, but they were talking about it and trying to get feedback from everyone. And I think just looking at the way the RFC process worked compared to like other frameworks, they actually responded to every single person, the community. The core team members actually answered. Like, if someone had a question on there in the RFC, they would answer them, and they'd even like take conversations into separate channels depending on the depth of someone's question and if it was valid and so on. So yeah, I think that's like really cool.
So as I said a couple times, pre-alpha stage, but Divya, do you know, is there any sort of ETA or
they
anything?
keep saying end of year, but I have no idea.
That's pretty soon.
Yeah, end of year is pretty soon. So already like October. Maybe it's like it'll be a Christmas present.
There you go.
Like end of year thing. I have no idea. And I don't even think they've put a specific date on it. So perhaps the core team internally have a date that they haven't like publicly announced, just because it's hard to hold people accountable when you don't know. There's so many variables. So end of year is what they slated Vue 3 for, but there's a chance. Yeah, who knows?
Well, as the old joke goes, they said end of year, but they didn't say which year. So lots of room for slippage there.
True. Yeah, that's true.
And as those of us who've done many estimates over the years, I will just say take the developer's estimated time and then triple it, and then you're going to be about there. You'll be right on task. So wait and see. Let's talk about Facebook, VR, AR, like avatars. Divya, this was your bullet point in the list of news. So tell us what's interesting about this.
Yeah, so this came up recently. So I'm not super into VR or AR. I just cursorily read stuff about it because it seems really cool and totally outside of the zone of knowledge that I have. But one of the problems I've heard from the VR and AR community has generally been how terrible the avatars are and how like they usually depict very like, there's not a lot of lifelike features to them. It's very like cartoony and silly looking. And so Facebook has been working on like lifelike avatars, just because a lot of the times when you work in VR, the idea of like VR and AR, I think they call it XR, it's like cross reality, because it's like both like augmented and virtual reality.
There weren't enough acronyms, so they had to add one more.
Yeah, XR. So the idea of it is if you want to extend, or I think it's extended reality. Yeah, extended reality. But the idea of that is if you want people to have this like augmented version of the current world, you need to implement a way of making it very much more real life. And so they've been working on trying to create avatars that are more akin to what you see like IRL. And they've been working on like this, I don't even know how long, but essentially with the Oculus now, it's able to capture gestures and like facial features. And so it can even mimic like how your face moves. Because in the past, it would be pretty straight faced. Like it would basically be your face, but they wouldn't be able to capture tiny gestures that your face makes. But I think with like the way they've been working with codec avatars and like real life avatars, it's able to capture movements, facial movements, which tend to be really minute, which I think is like really remarkable.
I'm just waiting for the day that we have what they had on the Starship Enterprise with the holodeck. And once we're there, I'm ready for it. Until then, the Uncanny Valley appears to go on for days. So very cool. Links to the research inside of that in the show notes. Facebook is building the future of connection with lifelike avatars. Very interesting.
It's kind of funny to see just like they did like the keynote at F8? That's the conference they do, right? Yeah. And it was just interesting to just watch because it seems so ridiculous. They had this interview with like the one person talking to another person and asking them to do facial gestures. And then the other person's like, I can do a shocked face. And she does a shocked face. Like, I can also roll my tongue. And I was just like, what am I watching?
So here's a conspiracy theory. Maybe Zuckerberg is their beta test for their lifelike avatar. Because he seems to be almost
Isn't
human.
he like straight faced? I feel like he has no facial gestures.
That's what I say. Remember the video when he was being interviewed by Congress or something? He was at a trial and he was drinking the water.
Totally.
And everything was very robotic. Like he was like telling himself, drink water now, because that's what humans do. So maybe he's just an avatar in progress.
The grand plan. But nonetheless, it's actually really interesting. As much flack as we give for like all these companies like Facebook and Uber, they do a lot of interesting work. So like Uber is doing a lot of driverless car, like driverless vehicle type things, which is super interesting and cool. And like Facebook is doing this cool like XR work, which is interesting as well. I mean, if you just take aside the ethics part of things,
you just throw away the ethics.
Divya,
everything is cool.
No, I mean like ethics is important. I'm just saying like
right.
If you look at
it's
it
not all bad.
The technology is really interesting, but like obviously there are some. I have a lot of qualms like around just like these particular, because I'm like, it's cool to have lifelike avatars, but would I want to? I still am like, do I want augmented reality to be like part of my reality? I don't know.
If augmented reality is part of your reality, does that make it become just reality again? I don't know. These are the deep questions that we have.
Yeah, it's like the metaverse, and I'm just like, I don't know if I'm ready for the metaverse.
This episode is brought to you by Algolia, search technology to power your business. Trusted by Twitch, Stripe, Adobe, and many more. Even us, yes, we use them to power our search, and we love the way they obsess over that developer experience. They let us fine-tune the index for the best results and report back what people are searching for, even servicing search terms that get 0 results, which we love. Check the show notes for a link to get started for free, or head to algolia.com to learn more.
All right, we are back, and we're here for Pro Tip time. This is where we share our pro tips, whether we're an actual pro or maybe not. But we have some life hacks, we got lessons learned from doing dumb things, whatever it happens to be. We like to share them with you. Suze, please share with us your pro tip.
Yeah, I want to talk about Hammer Spoon, which is technically Lua, but I'm going to try to sort of say it's similar syntactically to JavaScript.
This is not Lua Party, Suze, but I'll allow it.
I'm sorry, but it's like, it's really good. So it is relevant to JavaScript too, because So this is only for OS 10. So I'm sorry to those out there who run Linux or Windows. This is specifically for OS 10 or Mac OS. Hammer Spoon is a tool for like scripting automation. So you can do certain tasks. And so the reason why I bring this up is because you can write Apple scripts, or you can write sort of like JavaScript, which ends up just, I think, getting compiled back down to Apple script. But those APIs that the native operating system gives you, even the JavaScript ones, are just not fantastic.
I agree.
And so Hammer Spoon is aiming to be an alternative to that. It is for the Lua scripting language, but if you do write JavaScript, you'll find it joyfully familiar. It's just not quite the same. And so Hammerspoon was introduced to me by a colleague when we were running a bunch of demo stations at a conference recently. And so he wrote all of these scripts to set up 4 different demos. And we could just hit a shortcut and it would set everything up. And it reminded me very closely of my Twitch stream setup, which I've written in AppleScript. And it's just, this is so much better that I actually want to move all my stuff to it. And so I do actually have my AppleScript for my Twitch stream is open source. And what it does is it pops up a bunch of Chrome windows that have like things like, lists of followers updating so that I can read them out. It opens like a specific Chrome window and a specific streaming profile for me. It also starts a bunch of programs and minimizes them, and then it starts playing music that I have in the background of my stream and things like that. So you can check that out. I actually will include the link in the show notes. But it just has these weird, like AppleScript has these weird issues with it. I've actually had people open issues on my open sourced AppleScript because they'll say, what is that funny, weird ASCII character on the end of every single line that you have? And is that a bug when you were like committing it, or is it something weird with your computer? And I said, well, no, AppleScript doesn't allow you to just do line breaks wherever you please. It will actually break. And so the way to do it is to use ASCII code 182, and that is the A with circumflex accent. And that's how you actually get your code to go to a new line. But that character is visible in your AppleScript. And so it's extremely silly.
I'm looking at it right now. It does look silly.
It does look very silly. And it's only in certain locations where I'm trying to define an array or something like that, and you can't just have line breaks on arrays. So you end up with these like giant objects, long lines, which is really hard to read and maintain. And so Hammerspoon kind of takes a whole bunch of that stuff away. There's already pre-written spoons, they're called, which is sort of just like plugins that do very specific things. And so it can even do just things like when your computer transitions between different Wi-Fi SSIDs, you can actually have something happen. And just like incredibly useful things to augment your everyday life on your computer with. And I want to get more into this stuff, not necessarily automation to be lazy, but just having little things happen that increase the quality of life on my computer every day that I've sort of like smoothed over because I've thought, oh, well, I'm not able to do that on the operating system.
Yeah, I wonder if I can use this. I have one desire, which I have never quite filled, which I want a copy as Markdown system service. So you basically take some HTML, because we do a lot of stuff where we'll copy it and then we're basically covering it as a piece of news. And so we want to like put the Markdown in there as like a block quote with Markdown. So I want copy as Markdown. You can find it as like a Chrome extension. Again, I don't use Chrome, or there's Safari things that don't really work, but I would love it to be a system service. And that led me to writing some AppleScript that was just like, and then I was like, well, I can use JavaScript now, right? And so I went and looked at the JavaScript APIs that Apple exposes, and it's like, there be dragons. I didn't really love what was going on there. And I was like, I don't really need this that bad. So I just stopped. And I wonder if I could achieve that with Hammerspoon maybe.
Yeah, I know that there is some Markdown-y things that you can do in it.
Cool.
The API is just so incredibly extensive, and it made our life so much easier with demo stations and automation, but it is really good for other little like conveniences like that.
So I didn't hear, did you say you're going to rewrite this Twitch setup, or you did rewrite this Twitch setup, or you?
I was aiming to, but because it's not cross-platform.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering what I should do about that, but mostly because I also want to be able to run some very similar tasks on Windows as well.
I see.
So it hasn't like solved all of my problems, because I would have to use something like maybe auto hotkey or something like that on Windows. So if anyone's got some good Windows automation suggestions, otherwise I'm going to have to use PowerShell, which is totally fine. It's just that I don't feel as comfortable. It doesn't feel as intuitive to me to use something like PowerShell.
Very cool. All right, Divya, you are up. Pro tip time.
Cool. Mine is not a super technical pro tip, but I feel like I should stress this, that it's really important to find balance in your life. It's more like a pro tip for me, myself, because I find that oftentimes you get really wrapped up in work, and you assume that work is always a priority, and sure it is, but I think it's also important to note that your own like health and well-being is also really important. I feel like it's such a cliche to say like self-care, but I like to think of it more as just like taking the time to about like basically refocus yourself. So I've been using Headspace a lot just because it's a really great tool to take however much time you need. Like they have various time increments, so you can do 1 minute if you don't have a lot of time and you're impatient.
Is this a website? Is this a
It's an app. It's an app for like meditation.
Okay.
And it's also a great tool for like if you need a wind down before like going to bed. They have like various sleep casts. They have like bedtime stories. I know it sounds so childish, but like it's kind of like a fun little like story. I mean, people listen to stories. There's like This American Life and all of that stuff.
Sure.
Kind of similar, but it's like kind of just to take your mind off of the things that you're doing during the day and to just wind down, which I think is really important because like taking rest and just resetting is useful to like being effective in your work and so on.
I agree with this, and I also use Headspace. And if you work in the US and you have like health benefit offerings, sometimes you are actually able to expense the subscription to Headspace as well, which is something to look into. In my last 2 jobs, including my current job, I'm able to actually expense things like Headspace, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I find that sometimes I accidentally get really pumped for something just before bed, which sucks. So last night I was looking something up and then I realized all of a sudden I could achieve something way easier in a technical sense for a project. And then I was like, oh, I just want to do that now. And then I obviously had to go to bed. And so I usually use Headspace in one of the bedtime ones to just let go of that so that I'm not spinning all night saying, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to write it in this way, and then I'm going to like glue this piece together. And like, otherwise I just don't sleep. And then of course I get up the next day and I'm so ineffective and tired that I don't end up being able to do the thing.
I'm with you. And as Divya, you found out a couple weeks back on our learning lessons episode that I listen to podcasts before bed or as I trail off to sleep. And one thing I try to do with those is I don't do that to learn as much, although you do end up learning on accident, but I'll try to listen to ones that I don't really care about all that much, or that I'm not like invested in I'm not trying to like dig everything out, like the stories or people play games, people hanging out, or like comedy podcasts where I don't really care that much what they're saying. And that helps me just turn my brain off, listen to somebody else's brain for a minute until I can actually fall asleep. But I've never heard of this sleep casts. Did you say sleep casts? Yeah,
it's part of I think it's part of the Headspace app. So Headspace has various tracks, and I think Sleepcast is part of that. There's a track for it. So it's technically this idea of like, it's meant for nighttime use. And so you would go to it and then they also have like various sounds. So you can also, if you need the sound of rain or like a rainforest or something, they also have sound bites that you can use if that helps as well. That could be useful.
Speaking of, my favorite podcast to fall asleep to lately has been Bilbcast. That's BILB. And it is Bilbo the cat purring for an hour.
Oh, that's adorable. That's so cute.
It's just a cat purring.
Yes. And he's sitting in his owner's lap. And as sometimes she'll like change the way she's, like giving him attention. Mm-hmm. And then he'll just start purring in a different way because he gets like super into it. And like maybe she's like scratching him behind the ears or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very cute. You should follow him on Twitter too. He's a great cat.
Love it. Amazing.
How about you, Jared?
Yeah, so for my pro tip, this is something I wanted to talk about during our communication episode that we did a few weeks back, but we just never quite got around to it. And I thought I would throw it in here as a bit of a follow-up for communication skills. We talked about issues, we talked about PRs, we talked about how to convince people of things and talk to users and whatnot. One thing we didn't address was just email in general and how to write effective emails and how to get back what you're looking for. There is a fellow named Lazaridis. Sorry, Laz. Messed up your last name there. A little alliteration and some rhyming. But he wrote a post called Composing Better Emails specifically for developers, like how to quickly address what you're communicating, how to avoid misunderstandings, how to save time with your email, because we can all waste tons of time in email, both as a recipient and then as like a sender. Like you send an email and you're like, well, that email sucked because the person didn't understand me or they didn't answer the question. So he has a bunch of really cool tips. And the pro tip from me, which I've just started to do in the last couple of years and have found to be the one small thing that I think has affected my emails for the better the most, probably in my life, is if you have multiple things that you're asking for, lots of times you have a few things that you're saying, as email tends to be a little bit longer form than a text or a Slack or what have you. Let's say you have 3 things that you're asking of the recipient of the email. It's incredibly effective. I would love to have stats on this if you number the things. And it's like on a small thing. But if I have 3 things to ask, I will just put number 1, here's my question. Number 2, here's my question. Number 3, here's my question. What happens oftentimes, maybe y'all have experienced this, is if you don't number them or make them explicit and you do ask a few things, maybe even you finish it with like question, a sentence that's a question, a sentence, like 3 questions at the end, is people will either answer the first one and that's it, or they'll answer the last thing you said and that's it. Or sometimes they're really bad. They don't answer anything that you're asking of them. But you can't really fix that. I've found so many more people will answer all, N questions that I have or address all N things that I say if I just number them out explicitly. It's like it's just a visual cue. And receiving as well, I appreciate it. I'm like, okay, here's your 4 answers. 1, 2, 3, 4 for the 4 questions. So that's a little bit of a pro tip. Also, I'll link up his post, Composing Better Emails, in the show notes. It's worth a read. He's got a lot of good ideas as well.
I could do with this. I'm definitely that person who is guilty of, I'll read an email from start to finish and then I might reply to it, half an hour later because I got distracted by something. And then I just won't see all of the requests in there. And then I'll be pegging on extra emails saying, oh, and by the way, to answer your other
Follow-ups.
question.
Yeah.
It's very annoying.
Also, it's hard to often whenever I have to ask someone a question, I want to give context to that question, and then the question gets buried in that paragraph.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, I've been doing that a lot lately too.
Yeah, because you're like, it's kind of rude to just start with the question, but at the same time, I'm like, if you started with it, they would be able to.
Yeah.
I've started bolding stuff, which I feel is the more crass version of numbering things.
Yeah.
I need to stop bolding things and actually just lay out my emails properly.
I mean, it's funny because I know lawyers do that a lot. They'll be like, blah, 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 and please remember to do this thing.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And I used to get ones from a certain attorney, like highlighted in bright yellow.
Oh, God.
In all caps, and I felt like they were yelling at me for being an incompetent client.
Yeah.
I think we all tend to use bolding. Rebecca in the chat says they also use bolding for most relevant bits. It's you got to use bolds like you use salt on your meal, right? Like sparingly, too much, and you just ruin it. Like if everything's bold, nothing is bold. Am I wrong?
Yeah. Doesn't really improve the taste, but sure. Yes. It looks, I guess.
Oh, you've never tasted one of my emails. They are tasty morsels.
Short and salty.
Short and salty. So there you have it, our pro tips. Any curious from you two, any other tips on email specifically besides the numbering bit that you found to be helpful for folks? Putting you on the spot.
I think the other thing that gets often forgotten is like the importance of the subject as well, and like crafting the proper subject, which is really hard because sometimes if I have a question that I want answered, I put the question in the subject, which is like, I don't know if that's effective because sometimes I don't want it to be too direct. Like if I ask the question and I don't expect them to say yes, I'll be like, if they see the question, they'll say no and they won't even bother reading the email. So I try to create a hook, a subject that like gives enough information, but not enough that they have to read the email.
Ooh.
So
it's
crafty.
This is akin to clickbait, right? I mean,
yeah,
it really is.
It really is.
It's kind of the same concepts of like a title of a blog post. It's like, how do I make it intriguing, but also not like giving away the content?
Yeah,
and,
exactly. So like
tough.
being mysterious, but like not, I don't know.
I'm not that creative. Although, like, one thing that a lot of people do at my new place of employment is, instead of, because we use G Suite, so instead of highlighting a word and then linking it to something, and then you have these paragraphs where there's like all of these kind of distractions where you're like, oh, there's a link there and there's a link there, and maybe I should read this and come back to the email. Like, you write the entire email and then you just do the markdown style footnoting where you'll just have like, 0 in like square braces straight after like something that you're mentioning, like a document. And then you just kind of number them all. And then right at the bottom of the email after signing off, you just like list them one underneath each other with those footnote numbers. And I've found that so helpful, especially because I'm new. I'm just like, I have to read all the documents and I have to like find out all these things. But instead, I'll read the email all the way through and I'll be like, yep, I'm going to look at them once I've actually got the gist of what's going on. I don't know. It just kind of shortcuts my brain away from wanting to click on all the links as I'm going along.
Okay. That's interesting.
That is interesting. So Gerhard Lazou, who's a changelog friend who's done a lot of our infrastructure work and has written some blog posts and whatnot, he wrote this big long blog post about the new infrastructure a while back, and he put all of the relevant links at the very bottom in the exact same style that you are saying. And I went back and I was like, dude, you got to inline those because nobody wants to wait till the end. He's like, he goes, am I the only one who doesn't like to be distracted in the middle of a sentence by a link and then I'm going to click on it, I'm going to go somewhere else and never come back? And I'm like, yes, you're literally the only one. You have to put those in line. And now I can say, no, there's 2 people because Suze loves it, especially in the context of email. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the person that I have a browser extension to stop and hide GIFs because I can't read articles while there are GIFs playing. Like, I just stay off. BuzzFeed.com is not my website. I just don't go on it because that's just literally what it is. But I just cannot deal with it. And that's the main reason why I use an ad blocker too, because so many ads of videos and all sorts of things, I literally can't concentrate on the text.
Well, Suze, Divya, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Everybody listening live and in the chats, thanks for hanging out with us while we party. For those listening on the produced version, hey, come hang out 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. We throw a JS party each and every week. We'd love to have you participating. Did you know we take requests as well? If you have a show topic, a guest, or even specific hosts, I would like to see this person talk to that person about this thing, head to changelog.com/request, and you can pick JS Party from the dropdown and let us know what you would like to hear on this show. We want to be by and for the community because that makes everything more awesome and more fun. So let us know what you would like to hear. That way we don't have to guess what you'd like to hear. It'd be awesome. That's our show for this week. You don't have to stay here, but you can't go home. That's not how you say it. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. There we go.
All right, thank you for tuning in to JS Party this week. Tune in live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern at changelog.com/live. Join the community and Slack with us in real time during the shows. Head to changelog.com/community. And do us a favor, share this show with a friend. Rate us on Apple Podcast. Go into Overcast and favorite it. And thank you to Fastly, our bandwidth partner. Head to fastly.com to learn more. And we move fast to fix things around here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. We're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Check them out and support this show. Our music is produced by Breakmaster Cylinder. And you can find more shows just like this at changelog.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Brakes on the car, brakes to make you a superstar.
All right, y'all ready for this?
One sec. I'm trying to find this ASCII character.
It's
very important for the show.
63.
182.
Oh, dang it.
It's relevant. It's 100% relevant, I promise. Okay.
I love it. Hold on a second and try to find this ASCII character. Things Suze says. Now, how do you say things? Suze says? That's a tongue twister too.
Things.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a website. ThingsSuzeSays.com. Your live streamers would love it. Hold on, I'm trying to find this ASCII character. Okay. Pro tips.